Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I always used to think that resilience was some sort of byproduct of a shampoo or a conditioner, and it's not. It's really about being able to bounce back. It's that sort of flexibility. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he said that in life we have absolutely no control over what happens to us. But what we have absolutely paramount control over is how we respond to certain events. So it's not what we do when we get knocked down, it's all about what we do when we get back up again. And I think this is why it's so important. So some of these concepts that I'm going to show you for understanding resilience might seem a little bit obvious, a little bit twee, but I think we live in a very busy society, and I think sometimes we just forget. We forget how to be more in the moment, and we forget to do the stuff that is good for us. Resilience starts with accepting what you can and cannot change. This is quite a simple concept, but it's quite a difficult concept to get your head around. We can't change the weather. We can't change what's going on outside today, but we can certainly change how we interact with it. Just as we can't change our history, we can't change what has happened to us in the past. We can't change past hurts. We can't change our families, but we can certainly change how we look at these things, how we feel about it, how we move forward going into the future. And you can't build resilience without going through some kind of adversity, which sounds quite unfair, and it sounds like a bit of a catch-22. But when we actually go through something, when we embrace it, when we try to understand it, and we actually go through it, we can come out the other side and be better for it. Our mind is phenomenally powerful. It's very persuasive. It can be quite damaging. But this is the one thing, and I think this is quite a lovely thing to remember, is that thoughts are not facts. Thoughts aren't really what's going on. All we have are our thoughts. We might have outside sort of circumstances that are influencing our thoughts, but at the end of the day, all we have in this life is our thoughts. So try and get some sort of context into which we're thinking. And the other thing is, to never act on them. How do we build resilience? Well, we start by gravitating towards the stuff that floats our boat, that brings us joy. Apparently gardeners are one of the happiest people around because they get a return on their investment. They're outside, they're getting vitamin D, they're getting flowers, fruit or vegetables. They're working with the seasons, they're working with the soil, all this sort of stuff. Being around people that lift your boat, that lift your spirits, make you feel good about yourself, extricating yourself from people who put you down, who are cynical, who are toxic, trying to get away from those. Life is too short to be around negative people. Exercising your mood. We've done research at the Black Dog Institute that shows that regular exercise is as effective for treating mild to moderate depression as antidepressants. So it's been a clinical study that has been shown to do it. Install a keeper of the gate and become aware of where your thoughts take you. Quite often, I remember when I had, in my Black Dog days, it was like a sort of a slow downhill gradual slope, and I'd go, God, how did I get to this point? But I realized in hindsight that a lot of my thinking had been going on for quite some time, and I just wasn't pulling myself up and going, hang on, where are these thoughts taking me? What are these thoughts achieving? All these sorts of things. I always say that knowledge is power and validation is a great healer. If you're going through difficulty, learn about it. One of the greatest books that I ever read that helped me in my journey was Darkness Invisible by William Styron. Miserable, miserable bloody book. It was really about his slide into depression. But the thing why it really helped me was because he absolutely articulated and nailed what I was going through myself. I had a lot of people telling me how I should be behaving and what I should be doing, but no one had actually said what it was like. Create a mantra that you know to be true, that you can believe in, not necessarily these ones here, but repeat often. What I like to say to people is write it on a post-it note, stick it on the mirror, brush your teeth to it in the morning, and then brush your teeth to it at the end of the day. Start your day thinking well of yourself, end your day thinking well of yourself. And what it does, again, it has been proven that it does start to get into our cortex of our brain, and it starts to become how we see ourselves. Create doable tasks, not refinancing your mortgage or doing your tax, just little things you can tick off and then reward yourself for a job well done. Again, we're so busy, and I'm guilty of this as well. I have to warn you, I am constant work in progress. I get so busy and I get so caught up that stuff passes me by. And quite often I have to stop and really take some time out and think about what I've done, what I've achieved and how I got there. For me, this is probably one of the most important slides. And this is if you go through adversity, if you go through difficulty, if you've learnt from that, if you've come out the other side, you're wiser, you have more purpose, you're kinder, whatever it is, recycle that experience and try and help others. Helping others is one of the greatest ways that we can fortify our own resilience and our own happiness. It's really that simple. I'm not a guru. I've never been to an ashram. I don't understand what the chakras are. I don't understand the meaning of life, but what I do understand is that my life is so much better when I meditate. I really want to try and mainstream meditation because I think it can just make such a difference in our lives. Behind the doors of our mind lies a great city. It's a beautiful city. It's full of inspiration and wonder. There are incredible theatres that are built just purely for you. Art galleries that are always open for inspiration. Vast libraries that are full of history and future plans. There are huge parks where the mind can roam free, and massive factories where dreams and creativity are made. This is our natural state. This is how we should be. Unfortunately, this is what happens. We get into sort of cyclical negative spiral thinking. We can have up to 70 thoughts over a 24-hour period. This is a lot of thinking. We think while we're asleep. It comes in dreams. We've got very busy minds. It works out to be about a thought or one or two thoughts every heartbeat, around about that. It is a lot of thinking. Basically, our brains never shut up. And quite often our thoughts can become very dominant and very powerful, and they become negative, and they can overtake the more positive. And quite often these thoughts can be very intrusive. They can be very repetitive. And this is because in the vast library that I mentioned before, there's a very big dedication area dedicated to past woes, past hurts, fears of the future, all this sort of stuff. And this is what can happen. It can come in and enter our thoughts, and we get very stuck on those problems. And I believe our brains are a little bit like the hard drive on a computer. And I really believe that negative thinking takes up far more RAM than positive thinking, if you like. So if you've got a lot of junk email on there, if you've got a lot of junk and spam and negative thinking coming in, it's going to clog up your memory. And when this happens, we lose our ability to concentrate. I don't know how many of you have that thing where you're reading a book and you just read the same paragraph over and over and over again. Recalling information becomes very difficult. It's like grasping against smoke. The problem is if we get into these sort of cycles of thinking, this is where anxiety, stress, depression, burnout begins to happen. And quite often we will go through periods of time, long periods of this, and putting up with it, and it's totally unnecessary. Why meditate? Well, I think it's all of these things. It turns down the volume. It takes the pot of boiling water off the boil. It cleans the windows. It makes me more present. It expands time. A lot of people think of meditation as a real time waster. I feel if I go into work I get into work at 8:45 or 9 o'clock, and I meditate for 20 minutes or half an hour, my day is so much more fruitful. I just seem to be able to get through stuff in strides and bounds than I would otherwise. And the other thing is it just makes me more engaged with those that I'm around. I just feel more connected, more in the moment, all those sorts of, all the cliches that you typically hear. For me, it is chalk and cheese in my day, really, if I don't meditate. So it's very important. There is preparation about telling people what you're doing, telling people that you're going to meditate and you need some quiet time, turning off phones, taking the phone off the hook, all that sort of stuff. Maybe if you're worried about time, my mum told me this one, which I think is great, set an alarm clock and put it in another room and shut the door. So you're not going to freak out when the alarm goes off. You're actually just going to hear it and you'll basically become aware of it, and then you can go and turn it off. We're not sitting to relax. We're not sitting to chill out and have a chill and put our feet up. We're sitting with intention. We're sitting with purpose. So find a stiff back chair. This kind of chair is fantastic. Get a cushion that we can put behind the small of our back, which gets our posture up. Put a sign up so you're not going to be disturbed. I think a lot of meditation aficionados would say, don't use earplugs or noise-cancelling headphones. I love them. I think my noise-cancelling headphones have been the best investment because what it does, it just brings my attention to my breath and my nose and, all that sort of stuff. And then have a timepiece if you're worried about the time. Find a room that is quiet. Don't sit in total darkness because you're more likely to go to sleep. Have some sort of ambient light. And then create the 1,000-yard stare, sort of staring off through the wall. Let your face go soft. Let your eyes go soft. Take a few deep breaths, and when you're ready, shut your eyes. The most important thing, I believe, is the nose. I call the nose a lighthouse in a sea of thought. When you get lost, look for it. So if I've got to do this, or I've got to pay that bill, or I've got to ring such and such, just go acknowledge that thought. It's really catch and release. Go, there's that thought, I'm going to catch it, release it, and then let it go. come back to the breath. If you need to itch, if you need to move, itch. Readjust, back to the breath. Create a mantra that you can hang your breath on. The reason for a mantra is really our minds want to roam. Our minds are built for thinking. Basically, if you've got a word that you can hang your breath on, you're not going to go off into that sort of wilderness and get lost in thought. When we smile, we actually release endorphins, which is our natural happy drug. So if you envisage yourself or picture yourself with a smile, you're probably going to have one during your meditation. Herein lies the problem. We have very little patience for ourselves, and we sit and these thoughts come up and we get really annoyed and angry that we're having thoughts, that you want to move. In fact, my wife, the first 3 times she did it, she said she nearly went out of her mind. She had so many thoughts going on. She said that her eyes were going backwards and forwards, and she was just like sort of hated it. She was hating it. And she's into about week 4 now, and she gets it. She understands it. She's sort of surpassed that, and she knows how to quiet it down. And the thing, I suppose the most important thing is not to get engaged with thoughts. Don't chase them. Don't get into an argument with yourself. Don't sort of continue conversations. Just sort of acknowledge them and release. And basically, I suppose the idea is to become observant. An observer rather than being involved, and just release. Release the thoughts, let them go. Picture yourself, and these are not to adhere to. These are really to put you in the spirit of doing a meditation. You can make up your own. It might be a fantastic holiday that you went on to, or you might be on a spaceship. I don't know. It's whatever you can think of. But your spaceship is on autopilot. The lights are blinking softly, and as you breathe, the stars get brighter, and the universe expands, and you feel less weight. But there is no place quieter in this universe than space between our breath. And if we can get down to that space where I was saying before, we can get down to breathing in and out and just becoming aware. It might be the space between the 2 breaths, or just between each breath, the in and the out, or just the singular breath. Eventually we can get ourselves into a space where I like to call it like it's like being in a room being devoid of absolutely everything in it, including yourself. It is a lovely place to be. Quite often when I meditate, I will spend half my meditation getting to that space. Sometimes I never get there because I think meditation, or the thoughts that throw up at us when we're trying to meditate, quite often reflect our mindset. Like if we're really stressed, you're probably going to have a really busy kind of meditation. If you're depressed, it's probably going to be a bit slow going. But if we work at it, this is why meditation is called a practice. We have to work at it. It's like you can't go out and go for one jog and be fit. So if you can bring it into your life and make it part of your life, like having a shower, brushing your teeth, going for a run, whatever it is, you can get to the space. Meditation shouldn't just be about that 20 minutes or half an hour that you do whenever it is that you do it. It should be something that you should try and transcend throughout your day and your life. When we ride a bicycle, for example, we're not cycling going, I'm pedaling the pedals, or I'm holding onto the handlebars, I'm putting on the brake now, I'm leaning into the corner. Really, riding a bicycle is quite a complex series of actions, but the thing is we're not overly thinking about it. What we like is just to be able to get there in smooth movements and all that sort of stuff. And it is part of the journey. And I think meditation is the same thing. We don't pull ourselves up when we're making faults. We don't try and sit still when we know we've got a really itchy nose. It's all these things about just trying to bring ourselves back to the breath, back to quietening the mind.
I really want to explore this idea of making meditation mainstream.
Yes.
Because personally, like most people who've done meditation at some point, I haven't managed to continue it, and have been big swathes of time where I haven't, but I've glimpsed enough to buy into the value of it, and also to know that it's a bit crazy that it's not done more regularly and recognized as something that is mainstream. So the main thing I want to ask is, what's stopping that from happening?
In researching this book, there are hundreds and hundreds of books on meditation. It begs the question, why is it there needs to be so much literature about something that is intrinsically simple, and why does there have to be so many words about doing nothing? And I suppose, that what I've learned is through picture books aimed at adults, that it gets much more to the core of the issue. And back to your question about the mainstream, I've been doing a tour of the NRL through the Black Dog Institute in Sydney, talking to these big buffy alpha male guys, about mindfulness and meditation, but also about mood disorders and all that sort of stuff. And I was quite worried. I did this talk to a room full of very big men. There was 95% men, and they were all looking at me like this, and I was folded. And they were fantastic, and the response to it was genuinely good. But I think, if people were to embrace it, if businesses were to make it part of their culture where they had a room for meditation, if we were to implement meditation into schools around exam time, I'm sure you'd see better results in business and you'd see better results in our young people.
I think that's great, and I'd love to see it happen, but what I'm curious about is the evidence base has been there for decades.
A long time.
Now, you're right, this may be a breakthrough to visualize it and show it in a more visceral, visual kind of way, but I'm still intrigued as to what kind of stops it from happening, because you give those kind of speeches, many give speeches of that nature. People buy the argument, they maybe even glimpse the experience, but then they get back to their busy lives, and the memory is kind of lost, and nothing really changes institutionally or systemically.
When I first came to London, I remember being horrified going into a pub, and I just couldn't see anything because of the smoke.
Right.
That has changed. The attitudes towards smoking has changed. I think attitudes towards exercise has changed. And I think it's just sort of a process of, just if we can keep redoing the message, show evidence-based research that shows the benefits of it. And I think, taking away a lot of the fear and spirituality and not that I'm saying that's a bad thing, but I think for a lot of people, that's what turns them off. They think it's all too hard. And I just think if we can do that sort of incrementally, it's a good thing. I think one of the biggest problems that we face in our society, I think technology is a very big problem. We have become so connected that we've become disconnected. We have no downtime. We have no time to just look out the window and be bored, God forbid. We have to tweet. We have to play Angry Birds. We've got to update our status. We've got to blog. All this thing. And I see it so often. I do so many talks to teenagers, and this is such a big part of their life. They are so connected to so many people, but they're not having the one-on-one conversations. And I do think, in some ways, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but I do believe that this book is quite timely, because I think it is a time where we are so busy, our brains have become so busy that we need to quieten it down a bit.
On so many things, we're crisis-driven. I mean, a lot of people start exercising because they get a bad reading at the doctor's. A lot of people start meditating because they have mental health challenges. But if I read you correctly, you wouldn't want it to be limited to that. I mean, it's so much better to meditate ahead of time and avoid the problems in the first place. To what extent is that sort of impetus necessary to get motivated to meditate? Do you think people can be motivated without that?
Look, I think, you nailed a very good point. I think it's very sad that people only start looking after their health after they've had a heart attack, all these sorts of things. And I think it's just, we can do so much preventative, positive psychology stuff that can fortify ourselves, on a daily basis. When I was in a bad space, I knew that I was in a bad space because I'd find myself at the computer at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to research the latest cure or the latest drug or whatever it was. And it was far too late. I was already going down that slippery slope and getting into a horrible no man's land. And what I've realized now is to maintain well-being and, a healthy outlook and all that sort of stuff is I have to do these things every day, every week. It is not something that I do when I become unwell, which I don't anymore. It's such an important part of my life now, and this is why I do what I do, because, it's just, I've got to walk the talk. I can't get up here and talk to you about what works for me if I'm not doing it myself, so it's very important.